Hi, Zizaran here, and with 2022 coming to an end, we are going to take a look at the past 4 Path of Exile leagues and do a review of what happened in the year. We're going to be including Forbidden Sanctum, which is starting this December, while keeping in mind that a lot of it is still ahead of us, so I'm not going to do a full review of that, just what we've done or what we've experienced so far. And since Courage League was technically the last league year, we won't be including that. So first, let's start off with Archnemesis.
Cirrus is dead.
So Archnemesis was the first league of the year and brings us a massive endgame expansion, Siege of the Atlas. That is the current Atlas endgame that we now have, and the patch includes the passive tree for the Atlas, which is huge and was very well received, gives the player more autonomy and player choice. And player choice is very important to a lot of people, being able to run what you want to play and skip what you are not that keen on playing. Being able to play exactly what you want to and not feeling like you're forced to run some content just because it's there, really big thing for a lot of people in the community. And then we now have the Void Stones, which replaced Watchstones. That's the 4 Void Stones you get from like Maven, Uber Elder, Exarch, and Eater. And it made it a lot more accessible, especially the first 2 being like the tutorial ones that are easy to get. And all in all, this made Atlas progression a lot less grindy, a lot more accessible, and getting to red maps and tier 16s is easier than ever before. And this also introduced a whole new endgame with the Exarch influence, the Eater influence, as well as we have the Maven influence as well, and we still have a lot of the old bosses. So you have so much to do at the endgame now. And on top of that, a lot of them have like really good new uniques, some which are amazing chase items like Ashes, etc, melding, so good. Really healthy things for the game. And on top of that, we got Eldritch implicits, which makes especially fractured gear insanely powerful and just makes normal gear valuable again, and not that you need actual influence gear on every slot. Archnemesis itself was a pretty minor league where rare monsters now would have like a thing that you could feed into like a super monster, and it was a little bit like better metamorph for me. And there was no like real endgame in the league itself, like there wasn't some sort of super boss you could spawn. It was just, you know, create your own more advanced metamorph, and it was incredibly rewarding. This one might take a while. Oh my god. It's like the dreams I used to have, except I get to keep the loot. You could choose exactly what you wanted to go towards. Mostly the only complaints we saw was some people didn't like the inventory. But I would say Archnemesis was very well received in general. And usually this is pretty common for when we have a massive expansion. Like the league doesn't need to be like as insane as like Sanctum right now is a very big league, very cool and really stands out, makes the game very enjoyable. Archnemesis ends up being more of a supplement. As for how I enjoyed it, I think Archnemesis was an amazing league. I had so much fun. It was a great league to play solo self on, and you got to do loads of loot explosions and actually chase down uniques. The endgame rework felt amazing, and there were new bosses to kill. So just all in all, a very enjoyable league for me. Very sad that, you know, it ended up warping the game for the next year almost, because Archnemesis, when going core, ended up being a very unenjoyable thing for a lot of people. So I was surprised they made it go core the way they are, but now at least at the end of the year, rares are in a pretty good spot. Now looking back at the next league, Sentinel is probably my favorite league of all time. So I was already in a very good mood from Archnemesis. I had a blast in Archnemesis, and boom, I go from a good league to another good league. What a dream. That's what you want, right? You want to keep getting back-to-back leagues that you yourself enjoy. Nothing's better than that. And Sentinel was such a blast. They did no balance changes at all, which was very odd. And they even said this is on purpose. They wanted to focus on other things. And I think that's okay from time to time. And this also brought revolutionary changes to the game in the form of the Uber bosses and the Uber race. So this is like the final version of the actual bosses that are incredibly hard. Barely anyone is able to do it on solo self and hardcore. And I think to this day, which is what, 9 months later, I think less than 20, definitely less than 25 people ever have cleared all 7 on solo self and hardcore. It is that hard. And a lot of people are farming them on softcore. So I think this is a pretty good healthy balance. That's crazy. And definitely something that like people like me really enjoy. I think that's very fun and exciting. One of the main reasons why this was such a good patch for me and why I enjoyed Sentinel so much wasn't just the league mechanic itself. That was very fine, you know? It was like a pretty minor league mechanic, but it was just a fun blasting mechanic. You pushed F2, F3, or F4 on the Sentinels, and boom, you buffed everything around you, and you just got more loot, made it more rippy. It was actually pretty dangerous. It was a nice blasting mechanic. It was pretty dangerous for hardcore, but I enjoyed it a lot. However, what really made this league special for me was Recombinators. I would say Recombinators is the single best thing they have ever introduced in the game. It would combine two items and take things from both. So there were a lot of like really cool experiments you could do, and what I really enjoyed about it the most was just the fact that it made me look at every single item in a new way. There was a lot of risk involved, and that is my favorite thing ever. High risk, high reward. It was definitely one of the best non-intrusive blasting mechanics we've ever had, and a lot of people don't like being pulled away from the map they're in to do other content. So very, very smooth, and it had like a little skill tree on its own, which a lot of people were worried about initially, but I think it ended up being pretty good and an interesting way to do things. And they have said that they want to bring back something like Recombinators in the future, but obviously we're all very worried about how nerfed will that be. But yeah, what are we going to see, or are they going to be incredibly rare? Overall, favorite league ever so far. The only league that has a chance of beating it would be Sanctum.
Exile. You have wandered far to arrive at the shores of my lake.
Well, I picked a good league to go on a honeymoon. This was highly anticipated. Scourge, which I quite liked, even though it was a bit rough on hardcore. Into Archnemesis, which I was pogging out. I'm so excited. Into Sentinel. DGD hasn't done a bad league in so long. Like the last bad league was like Expedition, which I hated. But now I had 3 leagues in a row that were amazing. So I had so high hopes for Kalandra. I was a little bit disappointed with the lore that she was a bird lady, because she's like, you know, supposed to be one of the main characters of the game. Yeah, it was a disaster. Absolute dumpster fire. Man, there were so many things wrong. Like first off, the mechanic, it was only limited to rings and amulets, which I thought was boring. And honestly, a little bit of it is on myself as well. I'd played this up in my head, because as soon as I heard like Kalandra, the first thing I thought was like, oh my god, we are going to unlock access to the original unique items. Because in the Path of Exile lore, unique items are mirrored. That's why we have limited ways of changing them. They are like mirrored by Kalandra, we're assuming. So I thought we would get like access to like, let's say a Comb's Heart with 10,000 life, right? And obviously for some lore reason, we can't wear this, but we have access to it. And then you could try to make your own version, similar to how like the heist replicas are different. Maybe sometimes things go wrong. Maybe sometimes you end up getting like 1,000 life Comb's Heart, or a 1,000 life Comb's Heart with 6 links, but you lose 500 mana. Like some things are going wrong. So high hopes for Kalandra going in. I was not expecting a bird lady magpie that just drops rings off in her lap. To be even worse, you would see Kalandra in the league mechanic and you'd be excited, like at least I get to see an attempt at a ring or amulet. And she would just leave. You'd finally see her and she would just leave. She would just fly away. So that was incredibly rough. There was just so many layers of bad, and this really drove home the point of how bad Archnemesis was, because now not only did we have a good league mechanic, nor did we have a good balance, we hadn't had any changes for a while, but Archnemesis was in such a bad spot, and spell suppression got nerfed, and we were just losing and losing and losing things. So everything was so heavily standing out. Like every issue that you would have like, you know, been able to glance away from in the past was now heavier than ever. It's very hard for me to say anything good about Kalandra because yeah, there was like very little I enjoyed. They end up improving Archnemesis throughout the league and fixing things, but it was just not enough for me, and I'm very, very glad that I took a break because it ended up just being like so good for me. And then let's move on to Sanctum League. That's the current league we're on right now. And this introduced a roguelike mechanic. I was very excited for that. I've been hoping for that for a while. I always wait to reserve judgment. I guess we are almost a month in and I'm still having a blast. The reason I'm a little bit careful about rating leagues before I've played like a month of it, which ends up being like somewhere between like 300 to 500 hours before I really want to rate the leagues. Sanctum has like, it's almost like a better incursion. It's got so many of the same feelings of excitement, and the roguelike mechanic is absolutely amazing. It's very well telegraphed. It's doable on most builds. Obviously, like things like Flicker Strike, they're still doable on those. People are doing that, but then you need to like over DPS quite a lot. People are still doing it on a lot of melee builds. Like Cyclone doesn't have an issue, Bone Shatter doesn't have an issue, and it's mostly like, you know, Dual Strike probably quite rough. It is the hardest thing mechanic we've ever had, but the roguelike is absolutely amazing. It's incredibly rewarding, especially on solo self-found. We have the Sanctified Relics, which end up, you know, being like a global buff that works outside of the Sanctum. The only thing that I haven't enjoyed so far is the fact that we can't store a full Sanctum. Game balance is pretty good, even though there were very few balance changes, or a lot less than normal, and a lot of people are like Resident Sleeper, stale meta. I would say the metas actually ended up being quite different. Combination of the new items we had and some changes, I would say the meta is actually quite different. The only thing that was very similar was all the league starters from last league were still good this league. But I feel like we're seeing so many different builds. Like we're seeing Poison SRS. We haven't really seen anyone playing that much before. We have like the Bane-like Vixen's build with the Impending Doom. All in all, a very, very enjoyable meta. Downsides to Sanctum early, like there wasn't any hit feedback on getting hit. And there's a low variety of rooms, but it is the most polished league mechanic we've ever had, where most league mechanics pretty much instantly you're like, oh, this is gonna get fixed, or oh, this needs to get fixed. Whereas like this league has needed very, very few hot fixes, no changes to loot at all, and the only thing that people are still wanting is a buff to how many rooms we can store, which doesn't change the rewards at all. Now, floor 1 and 2 is incredibly unrewarding, so for those people that are struggling and are getting stuck there, yeah, it's a very rough league probably, because it is by far the hardest mechanic we've ever had, and this is a hardcore mechanic really. Failing makes you lose all your stuff pretty much. I've seen a lot of people struggling, so I've tried doing series such as like guiding one of the people in my chat that were struggling in a YouTube video, and we managed to get him. He'd never gotten past floor 2, and we got him all the way to the last boss. I don't necessarily know if it's good for league mechanics to be this difficult. As much as I still enjoy it, I still prefer the system of the Uber bosses or optional content where, you know, this isn't as optional as the league mechanic. It should really be accessible for everybody, and everybody should be able to interact with it. So I think in hindsight, I do enjoy easier league mechanics. Well, okay, that's not true. I don't enjoy that more. I just think it's healthier for the game. And there's nothing else in the game like this. So this is like training us really in a whole new way than ever before. They also did a lot of changes to Atlas passives in this league. Some ended up being quite nerfs, and it was a little unfavorable because while they did say that, yeah, we're aware some things are missing, the way they phrased the fact that the Elder bonus has been bundled in, it sounded like there was going to be more things bundled in, but, you know, the Forbidden Flesh drop rate wasn't bundled in, the synthesized items wasn't bundled in, pretty much nothing was bundled in except the Elder drop rate. So a lot of people are very unhappy about that. They did mention, for example, the double Guardian thing was gone, and they said that was regrettable, but they want to find a way to add that back in the future. So hopefully a lot of these things are coming back. There's still enough in the league to enjoy it massively anyway, but and we have so much more chase uniques than ever before. And the Uber bosses now have the drops from all of the people that won the race, because that was the prize. You got to design a unique item. So all our items are in the game now. On top of that, we also have Ruthless or Hard Mode finally in the game. I got to try it out in early access, which was great because I wanted to see, is this something for me or something I'm going to enjoy? And it was not. I didn't really like it that much because of the complete removal of movement skills. And while it was pretty interesting and I was able to kill, I think I was the first on Soul Self-Found, or sorry, on Hardcore Trade to kill the Exarch mini-boss and the Eater mini-boss, not the main ones. I died before getting to try all the hard bosses, and I wanted to do Ziri. I was playing Cold Nut, so I don't think that would have been a huge issue. It just adds a large amount of tedium and makes things take a lot longer. It might be something I explore later in the league, and I think it's great that it exists because people do enjoy Ruthless. I thought the critical feedback on Ruthless was, well, a lot of it was just simply whining. So many people were writing like, they could have used this time to fix my melee skill instead, whereas obviously this is something that only 2 developers are working on their spare time. So I thought that was very odd. But either way, as a year in review, 2022 was a very rocky year for PoE. Kalandra dealing a lot of damage to the game, I'd say, but we had very high highs and very low lows. I still think it was a very good year for PoE, and it is a little surprising that just from one bad league, people were like, "Ooh, I wonder, Zizaran, do you think PoE will ever recover from this?" And I was like, wow, that's very dramatic. It's one bad league. And that's the damage I'm talking about, the fact that the perception changes like that. A wish list for the future, I honestly wouldn't mind if the next league was literally just an expansion of the Sanctum mechanic. I think the roguelike's the best thing ever, and I would love to see what happens to Path of Exile if for one league they don't have to reinvent a whole new mechanic, they end up just expanding on an existing one. I would love to see that at least once to see what it's like, because imagine 3 months work into boom, just expanding a mechanic. Maybe we'd end up with like 30-40 new rooms, loads of new bosses, a whole new level of Sanctum. I think it'd be really interesting, and I would love to see that. I do like that we're getting like a balance of, you know, blasting mechanics and like in-depth mechanics, and Sanctum being something you can still run on your own time. You don't have to like, you know, leave it every single map you find it, like Harvest, etc. So I think they're doing pretty good with that. Either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to let me know your thoughts down below, and sub if you liked the video. But more importantly, try to die less than I do.